Hi, I'm Chris Martenson, CEO and co-founder of peakprosperity.com, and I think gold should be a part of every person's portfolio. I've been a gold holder for about 15 years now, and the reason I think that is because gold is your hedge against uncertainty and financial shenanigans.
Chris Martenson from peakprosperity.com. It is great to be with you today.
Hey, it's a real pleasure to be with you, Ed.
So I want to talk to you, Chris, about a couple of things. Let's start with gold, and then let's move into your life's work and sort of how those two things overlap.
All right.
So first with gold. I know you advocate that everyone should have an allocation to gold, which I appreciate, but your reasons are, you overlap with an economist in many ways, but then you have a whole segment or subset of reasons that you like gold that are, I would say, wholly unique. I don't hear those types of things coming from anyone else. So tell me a little bit about why you like gold.
Well, sure. I've been a gold and silver owner, direct of physicals, since 2002. That's when I first started to dip in. And my reasons then were actually fairly purely economic. I was watching money creation, I was worried about devaluation of the dollar, typical stuff. But the further I got into the story, I realized, yes, those are all valid reasons. And by the way, you can multiply them by some whole number like 10 or 20 today compared to what I was concerned about in 2001. Quaint numbers, right? And but then I started to really understand energy. In my background, I'm a scientist by training in the physical sciences, particularly life sciences. So I understand how important energy is to everything we do. And I know economists usually like to think, well, you have the economy and everything humans are going to do, and everything's a derivative of that, right? I have it completely inverted. Energy is the most important thing. Everything else is a derivative of that. So once you begin to understand this energy story, lots of things begin to take shape. And so part of gold and silver for me is this idea that when you're investing in physical gold and silver, you're actually investing in an extraordinary amount of energy that's already been expended to get those into physical form where you can get your hands on them. Today, we're in a world where there's just huge amounts of energy. We're seemingly awash in it, but that's going to change. And when we do, the embodied energy that is in things suddenly is going to begin to really determine the value, not the price, but the value we put on these things.
So your argument is that gold is going to become more rare and scarce by virtue of it not being as accessible?
Well, certainly it's going to become, there's a point in time. Look, humans right now, we're basically 80% of all our energy comes from fossil fuels. And of the 20% that doesn't, they're all derivatives of fossil fuels. Trust me, if we didn't have fossil fuels, we wouldn't be building another Three Gorges Dam, right? It's just not possible. So when you look at the amount of energy we've got and where we are in the fossil fuel story, look, we eat the stuff. 10 calories of every food calorie that I eat has silently hidden in it 10 calories of fossil fuels, right? We use it to transport 95% of everything from A to B. We heat with it. So we're eating it, walking, talking, cooking, everything, right? So when you look at this, there are people who've done studies now and said, hey, there's not quite as much coal as we thought. Hey, natural gas runs out at some point, still abundant, but asterisks. Oil too, I'm not saying they're running out, but somewhere around the year 2030, they actually peak and then begin this long, slow disappearing act. Well, right about that point in time, that's when humans suddenly go, wait, we needed our financial system to compound by 8% per year. We don't, but our banks do. We need to pay off all of these outstanding IOUs that we haven't even figured out how we're going to fund. We need our economy to grow. We need a military. We need to eat. All these competing needs, we're going to have to then triage. And one of the things I bet you falls right off the list right away is digging mile-deep holes in the ground to pull out some metal, which, by the way, is what they're thinking of doing with copper in Resolution, Arizona. Rio Tinto has this new mine on the books, over a mile deep. 175 degrees Celsius down there. Don't worry, they're going to cool it. 600 gallons of water per minute. Don't worry, they'll pump it a mile out. And they're going after 1.6 billion tons of copper, scoring in at about 1.4% grade. Like by the time, listen, people should be just, at this point, eyebrows should be shooting up. Every scientist knows what I'm saying. When you are digging mile deep holes to drag 1.6 billion tons of ore out to get 1.4% copper out, trust me, by the time 2030 rolls around and we don't have enough fossil fuels to do everything, we don't do that anymore. And when we don't do that, silver production falls off a cliff, copper and gold production falls off a cliff, because in both cases they have some derivative where they're just base metal mining.
So you're obviously a long-term thinker, but what do you say to the people that say to you, you know, Chris, there's plenty of energy. You know, look at lithium batteries and the technology that is growing there. Look at the adoption rate for solar and the costs for solar. Look at the fact that fracking is you know, a U.S. phenomenon that hasn't even gotten outside of the U.S. yet, and when it does, you know, the glut that we have now is going to seem like nothing. What do you say to that?
So this is a complex world we live in, and to those people, if they're interested, if they're actually really curious, we can sit down and have a wonderful conversation. But you have to be willing to go into the complexities of the story, because it's not as simple anymore. So of the things you mentioned, batteries are not a source of energy, they're a store of energy. All right, you have to differentiate, make that as a big difference. Two, when we look at things like solar and wind or anything else we might do, or fracking, the most important question you can ask is not can we do it, but how much energy are we going to get back from that for performing that activity? So in financial terms, we get this right away. If I'm in a business and I get to choose between putting $100,000 into company A and I'm expecting a return of 20%, but I put $100,000 into company B and I get a return of 2%, we're going to go with company A in this story, right? Well, everything you just mentioned, they're basically company B. We are investing more and more, but we're getting less and less back out of them. What we have to understand is that the oil that we're running on, the gas that we're running on right now, comes from finds principally that were found in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Massive, high, huge energy return on energy invested. We talked about dollar return on dollar invested, energy return on energy invested. It's the same thing, but in energy. So we're at a state now where we're getting less and less and less back, and this is such an important story. I wish everybody knew it. We will know it as few people are talking about it today. Trust me, in 20, 30 years, everybody's talking about it. They're hitting themselves in the forehead. They're saying, how did we not get this? Because it's not a hard concept, but it takes a little bit of time to unpack.
So you're a smart guy. You have a PhD in pathology from Duke, I believe, and an MBA from Columbia. Cornell, sorry. You're a scientist and a businessman. Rare combination. So you have the ability to look at things from different perspectives. In your book, Prosper, which you wrote with Adam Taggart, it's an excellent book, I recommend it to everyone, you talk about resiliency a lot. It's a core tenet of the book. And you have a great way of there was a graphic in the book that I really enjoyed where you have two circles, a circle of knowledge and a circle of action. And where they overlap is where you start to develop resiliency. Tell me a little bit about, you know, I know we're in a short form video here, but tell me a little bit about how you look at resiliency, what it means to you, and how it applies to everything we've already discussed.
Well, nature does resilience amazingly well, right? And so the tenets of resiliency are basically don't have all your eggs in one basket, and you really want to spread your bets. And again, we understand this from financial terms where we say, oh, we need to diversify. Hey, very hard to really diversify in today's world when you look at how the financial assets are all correlated now, right? Really tricky business. So when we looked at how would you personally build resilience in your life, or how have I done it? Again, I can't just be financially resilient. Like I've got a bunch of money and I've got it all parked away and you know, I'm going to be okay because I've just got money. We think that you have to be more broadly diversified. So there's 8 forms of capital, of which financial capital is just one. And some other ones might include material capital. So in my homestead, you would see solar hot water panels, solar photovoltaics. You would see wood stoves. You would see an oil furnace in the basement. I actually have 4 different ways of heating my house. And that means that I can switch across them, but I've made the investments already, so they're there if push comes to shove. Now we've had electricity out a lot here, so I actually invested in a battery backup system in the basement so that when, not if, but when we lose power here in the third world nation of Massachusetts, I always have hot water, which is one of the tenets of being human, right? We have electricity, right? People can come over and shower. So that is resilience, meaning there's no single node of failure that's going to really take me out of my game. I can still conduct my business. I always have electricity on site. So that's one example. But we also think social capital, very important. You need to build that up. Living capital, which is the health. Both Adam and I have lost a lot of weight, gotten into shape, but we could also look at the living capital out in the gardens that I grow, the deepening soils, the fact that I have bees, got an orchard, chickens, all that. Living capital is really important to be around and to have access to. So we keep going through these different forms of capital, saying that if you're rich in all 8, you are far more resilient than somebody else, right? So even somebody who's rich in social capital, we know from Philip Haslam had this book about what happened in Zimbabwe. Goes through this horrible hyperinflation. You've seen the 100 trillion, right, notes. And what he discovered there was that, hey, some people saw this coming. Really smart people in Zimbabwe, they prepared. They stored some gold away. They got into alternative currencies outside of the Zimbabwe dollar. They got gardens going. But the crisis didn't last a year. It was a 9-year-long burn. These people, no matter how well prepared they were, ran out of whatever they stored in a year and a half or 2. So the question was asked, who thrived? Who survived? Who didn't? The people who thrived, the one determining factor that connected them was they had the best social networks because they knew who to go to, where to get stuff, who they could trust, all of that. So social capital is not just how many people you know, but how well you know them. So that's an example of something that we talk about really building. And I actually put concerted effort in my life to build social capital and discover that it has returns to me today. I love being very well socially connected today. And in certain futures, it could actually be a real lifesaver.
So tell me how you got here. I mean, you were a businessman, you were living in Connecticut, the state that I live in, which is quite different than rural Western Massachusetts. What happened, what changed in your life to make you want to dedicate your professional time to peak prosperity and helping other people develop resiliency?
You know how you can have something to be a blessing and a curse?
Yes.
Well,
I do, actually.
I'm a curious guy. That is my blessing and my curse. So 2001 happened and my portfolio got shredded. Look, I did everything right. I got the right degrees, I went to the right schools, I worked my way up to being vice president of a very large corporation, and half my wealth went away, roughly. So I said, well, this is unacceptable. And I'm talking with my broker then at Merrill Lynch and just saying, what? And he's like, stocks for the long haul. And so I started getting curious and I started digging in and discovered, well, no, I wasn't a genius investor through the 90s. I was just another lucky doof, right? And I wanted to understand this, and that got me studying economics in a very different way. And once I did that, I ran across a book called Creature from Jekyll Island, and I understood then finally by G. Edward Griffin how the banking system works. And I said, this is curious. I've been through an MBA program and they taught me how to compete for money, but not how it's created. It's not a hard concept. It's very easy. So I started asking people, have you ever been taught this? And now that I've talked to thousands of people worldwide in audiences, I've only had one hand go up from one person ever saying, yeah, I was taught by this crazy renegade economics professor at this small liberal arts college, but that's it. Right? And so my curiosity kept going, and then I discovered the unfunded liabilities of the United States. I understood money printing, and I said, this is not going to end well. And then my wife and I were living in Mystic, Connecticut, and she's not on board at this point. She's got 3 young children, doing the usual life. We've got a very nice waterfront home, the whole 9 yards. And I'm going crazy. And the more I dug into this, the crazier I got, because I saw how unsustainable everything was. And then once I communicated that properly with my wife, we made a decision and we moved out of the waterfront home in Mystic, Connecticut to a much more rural place, but with better, deeper community in Western Mass. So we changed ultimately my job, our friends, how we educated our children. They got yanked out of school. We started homeschooling at that point. Great decision for us. Our values, literally everything changed. And I think there was a little fear. I was like, oh my God, this is an unsustainable place. I don't want to be here if things go bad, there being Mystic, Connecticut. Now that I'm here on the other end of the story, I would tell you I would run towards this story because I'm much healthier, much happier, sleep well at night, have control of all of my finances, have a business that I love that I can bring my gifts to the world. This is a story for me of one of saying there is a better life out there. The life I bought into kind of unconsciously, the one I sort of just lived into, didn't work as well for me as the one I chose for myself.
So for someone who might not be able to pick up and move, what do you say to them? If they say, Chris, how do I start on the path of resiliency? What would you counsel?
Well, if they read Prosper, which is our book where we sort of put a lot of our learnings in, you'll discover that at least 4, possibly 5 of the forms of capital require no money. In fact, money won't help you, right? So a big one in there is emotional capital. In fact, I think it's the most important form of capital. So let's say you're rich in all other 7, but you fall apart the minute things get a little tight, or you begin to just drink yourself because you can't handle the stress. It doesn't matter how much of the other stuff you have. Well, emotional capital, turns out, is not something you can really accelerate with money. This is something you have to begin to develop on your own. You have to learn how to begin to develop the resiliency of being in command and control of your own emotional state. These are things that corporate executives are now learning through mindfulness training and all. Like there are ways I think you can enhance with money, but money is no guarantee that you're going to get anywhere with it in the first place, right? So for anybody who is somewhere where they don't want to be or isn't ready to move yet or can't, there are lots of things you can do right now in terms of building social capital, emotional, knowledge, right? So, for instance, somebody says, oh, I'd have to go back to school. Well, I just whip out my smartphone and I go, you can take every course on MIT for free right now. School isn't what's holding you back.
Right.
There's not a day goes by I haven't learned something new, right? So people are either learning it, and this is to me, it's a 3-stage process. You have to deepen your understanding right away, know the context of what's happening in the world. 2, you have to begin taking actions. And then 3, it's really about changing your state of being so that you are more well aligned with being able to weather rapid change, because that's what's coming, really rapid change.
So you mentioned that you homeschooled your kids, which touches on a topic that I'm interested in, which is financial education, which there is no financial education in this country, when you really get down to it. And you and I had a conversation last week about how the collective conscious of Americans, gold has sort of been beaten out of it. From a financial resiliency perspective, what do you say to people, and how do you feel about financial education in this country right now?
Well, it's abysmal at this point. I mean, people don't even learn how to balance checkbooks all the way at the bottom end. But our market structure has changed so dramatically since 2008 with the rise of the algorithms, the machines. Financial education to me, you have to understand the rules of the game you're playing in order to have any chance at succeeding at that game. And what's sold to us, open up the Wall Street Journal, they're like, investors sold gold today. But I'm going to put air quotes around that word investors. There are no investors in the gold market right now playing the paper game. These are all 99% of the volume and traffic is driven by algorithms. They have a logic all their own. You either understand that that's how the game is played or you don't. You understand that JP Morgan has been short silver every single second of every single trading day for the past decade and has not lost a single penny the entire time. Once you understand it's impossible for you or me to be short a commodity that's gone up and down and has a lot of volatility and never lose money, you then understand that there's a game here. JP Morgan has a very different sort of footprint, and they're the house, but really the house. If the house sometimes loses, we're talking about a house that never loses, right? We know that JP Morgan, not to pick on it, but their proprietary trading desk had 0 days of losses across all markets in 2016. Every single day was a day of winnings. Average winnings, $80 million a day. We know that there are high-frequency trading companies that have never had a losing day, ever. They're harvesting millions, tens of millions, sometimes hundreds of millions out of the market on a daily basis. Well, once you begin to understand market structure that way, that's part of the financial education. You have to understand that if you're up against people who never lose, you probably shouldn't be playing their game. This is the sort of education that I think people need to know. Or you say, I'm not playing the game, I'm going to go over here. And for me, a lot of gold and silver investing is about the long game again. I can't control what's happening over here in this crazy, house never loses sort of game, but I can understand the long sweep of things. I understand where we are in this story. I understand how much money and credit creation has happened and how much real stuff actually exists. They're getting further and further apart all the time. This story works if and only if we get really fast, high, sustained economic growth, please join me over here in the world of real stuff, and I'll tell you why that's not going to happen.
So is gold a hedge for you against what's happening over there, or what does it mean to you?
So two things. Gold and silver is not one word to me. They're two separate words. So gold for me is not an inflation hedge. It doesn't correlate perfectly or well, even with inflation, but it does correlate very well with financial accidents and uncertainty. When I dig into the fact that I think that there are a variety of sovereign nations that are completely belly up, insolvent, right? Insolvency is the technical term that precedes the legal thing called bankruptcy. The United States is insolvent, guaranteed. IOUs plus debts collectively 1,100% debt to GDP, forget about it. The only question to resolve is who's going to eat the losses. Gold is my hedge against that because I know when those loss times comes, here's what we know. Banks have bail-in procedures ready. We know that the Federal Reserve is ready to do QE 4, 5, 6, 7, 10, whatever they have to do to just keep this whole thing going. We know that there's more money printing coming, guaranteed. All of these things eventually are going to resolve into people finally waking up and going, oh, you either have a claim on real stuff or you have real stuff. And I think we're getting to that stage where people are going to wake up to having the real stuff. Now that's tricky, especially for North American investors, because we are marketed to daily that gold is not something you want to own. The Wall Street Journal cannot possibly, above the fold, put out with glee whenever gold falls. They never do the opposite. Right. Gold up 20 bucks, hunt all you want. You won't find it in the Wall Street Journal. Down 20 bucks, right there on the top. Right. So that's marketed to, but I travel a lot. I go to other countries. People in China are not marketed to this way, quite the reverse. People in India, quite the reverse. People in Europe don't even have the same anti-gold bias that we see here. So this is part of you say, what should people be educated about? You need to understand how you are being played and marketed to. I've written a bunch of articles on this. Look, Edward Bernays talked about propaganda in 1928. It's only gotten more sophisticated. The tricks and things that are used to convince you to stay fully invested in these assets but to ignore those, right, it's very sophisticated. It's astonishing. And I'm not here to say I'm above it. I'm telling you I have to not be exposed to it because it's that good. These people are fantastically good at what they do. And it's a machine. And it's a machine that's designed. Did you ever see Wolf of Wall Street?
Yes.
I love that scene. Matthew McConaughey and Leonardo, they're having lunch, right? Yes. And he explains, no, our job is to keep them fully invested. And we put cash in our pockets and go home every day. That's how it works. So the marketing machine is stay away from gold. You don't want that, but be fully invested in stocks all the time. That's the game. And that's the game that caused me to lose a lot of money in 2001. Shame on me, but I'm not going to get caught in it again.
Chris Martenson, peakprosperity.com. Thank you for your time.
My pleasure.